A distant scream echoed through the trees, followed by complete silence. It cut through the forest like a blade, thin and wavering, too far away to place but close enough to raise the hair along Daniel Mercer's arms. The sound lingered for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, caught between the trunks, before the woods swallowed it whole. Then there was nothing. No birdsong, no wind. Even the steady rasp of insects that had followed them since dusk seemed to falter, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Daniel stopped walking. The beam of his headlamp trembled as it swept over the undergrowth, illuminating ferns slick with dew and the pale, peeling bark of birch trees. Behind him, the path they'd been following narrowed into little more than a suggestion. Flattened leaves, a break in the brush. Ahead, the trail curved and vanished into shadow. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Mara slowed, then turned. Her expression was already tight, lips pressed thin, eyes fixed on the dark between the trees rather than on him. She nodded once. "Yeah." They stood there, listening. Silence pressed in from all sides, dense and unnatural. Daniel became aware of his own breathing, too loud in the stillness, and the faint creak of his pack straps when he shifted his weight. Somewhere deeper in the forest, something snapped. A branch or a trick of settling wood, but it sounded deliberate, timed. "Could have been an animal," he said, though the words felt hollow the moment they left his mouth. Mara didn't answer right away. She crouched, touching the ground as if she could read meaning in the soil. Animals don't usually scream like that. They had been hiking since early afternoon, following a little-used loop marked on an outdated map Daniel had downloaded weeks ago. It was supposed to be quiet, remote, a place where the world fell away for a night or two. When they'd passed the last trail marker hours earlier, Daniel had felt a flicker of unease, but he'd ignored it. The forest had looked normal then, alive even. Now it felt staged, like a set waiting for something to happen. "Maybe someone else is out here," he offered. Mara stood. At this hour? On this trail? She glanced back the way they'd come. The darkness there seemed thicker, the trees closer together, their branches interlacing overhead. "Let's keep moving." They walked on, but the rhythm was broken. Every step felt tentative, measured. Daniel found himself scanning the forest for movement, for a figure stepping out from behind a trunk, for any sign that the scream had belonged to something human. Nothing appeared. The headlamps carved narrow tunnels of light through the gloom, leaving everything beyond just out of reach. As they descended into a shallow hollow, the air grew colder. A faint mist clung to the ground, coiling around their boots. The smell of damp earth deepened, tinged with something metallic that Daniel couldn't place. He told himself it was just wet leaves and old stone. They reached a clearing that hadn't been on the map. It was small and roughly circular, the trees around it leaning inward as if curious. At its center sat the remains of a fire pit, stones blackened by old soot, ash long since scattered by rain. Daniel felt a prickle of recognition, though he was sure he'd never been here before. "People camped here," he said. "Not recently," Mara replied. She pointed to the ground. There were faint depressions in the soil, half-erased footprints leading away from the clearing and into the trees. They didn't look fresh, but they hadn't fully faded either. Daniel swallowed. They probably heard the scream too. The idea settled between them, heavy and unspoken. If someone else had been out here and had left, why? They pitched their tent at the edge of the clearing despite the unease crawling under Daniel's skin. Night had fully claimed the forest now, and pushing on blind felt worse than staying put. As they worked, the silence deepened. Even the usual distant rush of wind through the canopy was absent, replaced by a pressure that made Daniel's ears ring. When the tent was up and the small stove hissed to life, a sliver of normalcy returned. The soft glow of the flame, the familiar motions of preparing food. It grounded him just a little. He laughed once, nervously, at the absurdity of being spooked by a sound. Then something moved beyond the light. Daniel froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. He listened. Footsteps, careful and slow, circled the clearing just outside the reach of their headlamps. Each step pressed into the earth with measured intent, leaves crunching softly underfoot. "Mara," he whispered. She had already heard. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the light, her body rigid. The footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. Daniel counted his breaths, waiting for the sound to resume, for a voice to call out, for anything to break the tension. Nothing did. Eventually, the forest seemed to relax around them, the silence thinning until the faint chorus of insects returned, tentative at first, then steady. They didn't sleep much. Sometime before dawn, Daniel woke to a sound he couldn't immediately place. It took a moment to realize it was his own name, spoken softly from somewhere outside the tent. The voice was distant, blurred by the trees, but unmistakable. Daniel. His heart hammered. He held his breath, listening. Mara slept beside him, her breathing shallow but even. The voice came again, closer this time, threading through the fabric of the tent. "Daniel." It sounded almost like his mother, he realized with a jolt. Or rather, like the memory of her voice. Flattened, wrong around the edges. He squeezed his eyes shut and didn't answer. Morning came gray and reluctant. They packed quickly, speaking little. The forest looked unchanged in daylight, but the sense of wrongness lingered, clinging to Daniel like a damp chill. As they followed the trail back uphill, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Their footprints from the previous day led ahead of them, clear in the soft ground. But there were others too, matching their stride, walking alongside theirs, sometimes overlapping, sometimes slightly ahead. Mara saw them too. She didn't say anything, just quickened her pace. The trail eventually widened, sunlight breaking through the canopy in earnest. When they reached the trailhead, Daniel felt a rush of relief so sharp it left him dizzy. The forest ended abruptly there, the trees giving way to open road and sky. They didn't look back. Weeks later, safe at home, the memory of the scream still surfaced in Daniel's dreams. He tried to tell himself it had been a trick of sound, an echo twisted by distance and fear. But sometimes, late at night, he would wake with the uneasy sense of being listened to. Once, as he lay staring at the ceiling, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. The scream they'd heard hadn't sounded like it was coming toward them. It had sounded like it was moving away. They found a trail marker with their names carved into it. It stood just off the path, half hidden by lichen and wind-leaned grass, a narrow post of weathered wood capped with a faded metal arrow. At first glance, it looked ordinary, one of many markers that guided hikers through the upper ridges of the mountain forest. Then Elise noticed the letters. She stopped so abruptly that Jonah nearly walked into her. "What is it?" he asked, already annoyed, breath fogging in the cold air. Elise didn't answer. She stepped closer to the marker, the crunch of gravel under her boots sounding unnaturally loud in the thin mountain silence. The names were carved just below the arrow, shallow but deliberate. The grooves darkened with age. Elise M. Jonah R. Her stomach tightened, a slow, sinking pull. The carving wasn't fresh. The wood around the letters had smoothed with time, edges softened by weather. Jonah leaned in, squinting. For a moment he laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Okay, that's not funny." Elise straightened. "This isn't a joke." They stood there, alone on the ridge, surrounded by a forest that stretched endlessly in every direction. Pines crowded the slopes below, their tops swaying gently in a wind that never quite reached the trail. Above them, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the sun diffused by high clouds that flattened depth and distance. "No one knows we're up here," Jonah said. He said it carefully, like stating a fact might anchor it in reality. Elise nodded. She had checked twice before they left. No social posts, no shared location. The trail itself was barely mentioned online, a neglected spur branching from a more popular route miles away. That was the point. She reached out and touched the carved letters. The wood was cold, dry beneath her fingers. Too real. "Maybe there's another Elise and Jonah," Jonah offered, but he didn't sound convinced. "Common enough names." Elise pulled her hand back. With our initials? On a trail neither of us has ever been on. Jonah didn't respond. His gaze had drifted down the path ahead, where it narrowed as it curved around the mountain's shoulder and vanished into trees. They had already been hiking for hours. According to Jonah's GPS, they should have crossed the ridge and started descending by now, but the elevation hadn't changed in over an hour. The forest felt subtly repetitive, each bend in the trail echoing the last. The same twisted roots, the same broken stones, the same cluster of white flowers growing in impossible patches of shade. Elise suddenly couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a proper trail sign. "We should turn back," she said. Jonah hesitated. Back where? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Behind them, the trail sloped downward into shadow, indistinct and oddly unfamiliar. She knew logically that they had come that way. Yet when she tried to picture it, the clearing where they'd stopped for water, the fallen log Jonah had tripped over, her memory slid away, details blurring like fogged glass. "We've been going in circles," she said softly. Jonah checked the GPS again. The screen flickered, then went dark. "Battery was full this morning," he muttered. They stood in silence, the weight of the marker pressing in on Elise's thoughts. She became acutely aware of how quiet it was. Not peaceful, empty. No birds. No distant wind through the canopy. Even their breathing felt intrusive. "Let's keep moving," Jonah said finally. "Staying here isn't helping." They passed the marker and continued along the trail. Elise glanced back once, an irrational fear seizing her that the names would change the moment she looked away. The marker remained the same, arrow pointing forward, as if urging them on. The forest thickened as the afternoon wore on. The light dimmed without the sun ever seeming to lower, clouds smothering shadows and flattening time. Elise's legs ached, her sense of direction fraying further with every step. More than once, she thought she recognized a tree they'd already passed. A lightning-scarred trunk, a boulder split cleanly in two. But when she mentioned it, Jonah shook his head. "You're just tired," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. They found another marker near a narrow ravine. This one was newer, the wood pale and unweathered. Elise felt a flicker of relief until she saw what was carved into it. Not names this time, just a date. It was tomorrow's. Jonah stared at it for a long time. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're not imagining this." A low unease settled over them, deeper than fear. Elise felt as if the mountain itself were watching, patient and indifferent. The trail no longer felt like a path through the forest but a boundary, something laid out with intent. They didn't speak much after that. The air grew colder as evening crept in, the temperature dropping faster than it should have. Their watches disagreed about the time, minutes slipping out of sync. When Elise tried to mark their progress by the sun, she realized it hadn't moved perceptibly in hours. At dusk, they reached a small clearing ringed by stones. In its center stood a third marker. Elise's heart sank even before she read it. This one bore only a single word, carved deep and precise. "Stay." "No," Jonah said. He sounded hoarse. "We're not doing that." They walked past it. The trail beyond dipped sharply, winding down into denser forest. Almost immediately, Elise felt it, the subtle but undeniable sensation of being turned around. The slope felt wrong beneath her feet, the angle inconsistent, as though gravity itself had shifted. "Jonah," she whispered. He stopped. "Don't say it." They turned together. Behind them, the trail no longer dipped downward. It rose gently, leading back toward the clearing. The stay marker stood exactly where it had been, unchanged. Panic fluttered in Elise's chest. She tried to breathe through it, grounding herself in sensation. The rough strap of her pack, the ache in her calves, the smell of pine and cold earth. "We're lost," she said. "That's all. Trails do this sometimes." Jonah looked at her. His face was pale, eyes reflecting the dim light. "Then how did it know our names?" Night came abruptly, like a switch being thrown. They set up camp in the clearing, neither willing to admit it felt chosen. As darkness closed in, the forest pressed closer, the ring of trees tightening perceptibly. Elise lay awake long after Jonah's breathing evened out. The mountain loomed around them, vast and unknowable. She had the unsettling sense that the trail wasn't meant to guide them through the forest at all. It was meant to keep them on it. Just before sleep claimed her, a final thought surfaced. Quiet, insistent. She could no longer remember carving her name into that first marker. But she was suddenly, chillingly sure that she had.